We begin Masechet Nazir, Daf Bet. As we're going to see, this Mishnah and the Gemara on it is almost parallel to the very beginning of Nedarim. So we begin, Kol Kinuye Nazirut Kin Zirut. We're starting at the beginning with how one becomes a Nazir. The standard way would be one makes a vow and says Hareni Nazir, and he may indicate the how long he wants to be a Nazir for. But just like with vows in general, we also have substitutes or nicknames. So a kinui, there are other words that one can use. Okay, we're going to see those words in a minute. And now, ha'omer ehe hareze Nazir. As the Gemara is going to explain, even though in the Mishnah it just says these substitute words and then gives a whole list. So if we only had the Mishnah, we might think that all of these things on the list are different substitute words. But the Gemara is going to explain, actually, there's two categories of words that are not directly Nazir. One is a substitute that we're going to give examples of in a second. But first, the Mishnah talks about abbreviations, where it's not even a substitute, it's just not a whole phrase. Ha'omer ehe hareze Nazir. Usually you would say the full phrase ehe Nazir. But in this case, you just say an abbreviation. Ehe, I will be. And that works. That makes someone a Nazir. The Gemara is going to talk about, doesn't that sound ambiguous? Ehe what? It could be I will be anything. How do you know what it means? Okay, but that's one. Or ehe na'eh Nazir. Or similarly, I will become beautiful. That person's also a Nazir. The idea is that when someone grows their hair long and it gets curly, then they have a certain amount of beauty. And so this is a more indirect way of saying it. And it works. Nazik, Naziach, Paziach, Hareze, Nazir. These three words are all kind of rhyme or sound like the word Nazir. And what happened, just like vows in general, person doesn't want to say korban like a korban because those words already take on holy meaning. And so people didn't want to say them, but they did want to say something like it. The same way that in English there's lots of words like heck that people don't want to say, hell, and so they say a substitute word. And so the rabbis regulated these words. They might have come into common usage by people, or maybe the rabbis introduced them. But anyway, the rabbis are regulating and saying which words are considered official language that everybody understands. And there's other words that, if they're not here, then if someone just says some nonsense word that they just made up, then they're not going to be a Nazir. Okay, so these three are valid substitutes. Hareni kazeh. A person says, I am going to be like him. Presumably he sees a Nazir and he says, I'm going to be like that person. That works. Hareni mesalsel. I am going to be a hair curler. I want my hair to be curly. That also is a Nazir. Because what does he mean by that? Just that he wants to have curly hair? That would be an unusual thing to say. So more likely what he means is that I want to be a Nazir. My hair will grow long and then it will become curly. Hareni mechalkel. I'm growing my hair out. I'm kind of feeding it. I'm letting my hair grow. Hare alay l'shaleach pera. Or it's incumbent upon me to grow my hair long. Hareze Nazir. All these are ways of saying that he will be a Nazir. Hare alay siporim. So far we didn't have any machloket except for the last one. Someone says, I take upon myself an obligation of birds. Well, this is one of the things that a Nazir has to bring if he should become tameh lamet, which he's not allowed to be, but if he does, then he has to bring 2 birds. And so he's taking upon himself the obligation of 2 birds. So that's another indirect way of saying, I accept upon myself to be a Nazir. Does that work? Rabbi Meir omer Nazir. Hachamim omerim eno Nazir. Rabbi Meir says, yes. That is a way of saying it because the Nazir does bring it. Hachamim say, no, this is too ambiguous, too indirect. We don't know what he's talking about. In fact, not every Nazir is going to bring 2 birds. If he doesn't become Tameh Met, he won't bring 2 birds. And therefore, Hachamim say that is not good enough to become a Nazir. Okay, good. Now, as often is the case, opening Sugyot in the Talmud Bavli will focus on structure and language, and through that, we'll learn a lot of basics, fundamentals that will help us throughout the Masechet. So we ask first, Mikdi Tana Beseder Nashim Ka'e, Mai Tama Tane Nazir. First, the order of this, of the Masechtot, and why is Nazir in Seder Nashim? Right, we see the Tana, the author of the Mishnah, or the reciter of the Mishnah. We're dealing with Nashim. Okay, so very good. So we just learned a few Masechtot in Nashim, and so we're in the middle of laws that have to relate to women, like a ketubah. So for what reason do we have Nazir here? Right, a lot of Nazir is about korbanot that the Nazir has to bring, so it could be in Kodashim. What is it doing here? Really good question. And the answer is Tana Akera Ka'eh, where it's based on the order of Pesukim. Vayayim lo timsachen be'anav ki masa ba'irvat davar. We're going to connect Pesukim in Devarim, Pesukim Devarim with Pesukim where Nazir is stated in Bimidbar. So in Devarim, where it's talking about the basic law of divorce, it says, if a man does not find favor, if a woman does not find favor in a man's eyes because he found some matter of adva, so presumably some kind of adultery. And so this would be a typical reason why a man would want to divorce his wife. And now, if you're wondering what would cause a woman to go and do adultery, very often it's because of wine. She gets drunk, she loses control of her rational faculties, makes a bad decision. And so we see wine is one of the culprits. And that's why we connect sotah. Sotah is a suspected adulteress, and so anyone who sees a sotah go through the ritual of sotah and finds that she had transgressed, even witnessing that makes a person want to keep as far away as they can from such matters, from even the possibility of sin. And therefore, such a person who witnesses sotah is going to want to keep away from wine. The idea is like if you see a bad car accident, then you're going to say, you know what, I'm not going to drive at night. I'm not going to drive when it's raining or dangerous, right? Once you see something so bad and you say, I don't want that to happen to me, so you take extra precautions. Then the same thing here when if someone comes into contact with a situation of adultery and sees the punishment, he says, you know what, I'm going to be a Nazir, and that way I'll be saved from any of these problems. Therefore, since in Seder Nashim we do talk about sotah, therefore we're going to talk about Nazir as well. Okay, so interestingly, in the order of Masechtot, in fact, we do have Nazir and sotah. There's other versions of the order that we have of the Masechtot. But even according, let's just follow the order that we have. After Nazir, we have sotah. So these are back to back. They are clearly related to each other. But furthermore, in the Pesukim, we can see that we have Nazir the laws of Nazir are here in Bimidbar chapter 6. Ish or sheki aflilin do neder Nazir lehazir ladonai. And this comes immediately after all the laws of sotah. And so, in fact, the order of the Masechtot are paralleling the order of the Pesukim themselves. Even if the order is switched, the point is that there's a close relationship between sotah and Nazir. If you see a sotah, you're going to want to be a Nazir, and therefore, even if just taking the order that we have of Nazir first and then sotah, still, the idea is the same, that these are closely connected, and therefore Nazir is mentioned in Seder Nashim. Okay, good. So now that we resolved that, Patach bechinuyin faresh yadot. Now we're going to wonder, how come the Mishnah starts off with these are substitute language? Any substitute language, it was considered as if you said, I'm going to be a Nazir. And yeah, even though it starts off that way, then immediately, I'll show you again, right? And then it doesn't give an example of a substitute, but rather ehe, which is an abbreviation. So why would you introduce a category and then jump to a different category, which actually was not even introduced? You should go directly to nazik, naziach. Those are the substitute categories. That's the question. Amar Ravavi temakedi Hasure mehasera b'hachi katane kol kinye nizirut kinzirut vidot nizirut kinzirut ve'elu hen yadot hamerehe hare ze nazir. So Rava explains, and some say it was said without attribution, anonymously. Okay, so whoever said it is explaining that actually our Mishnah is lacking. It's missing words. Remember, the Mishnah was transmitted orally, and sometimes it would be transmitted in abbreviation, because the point is to memorize it in a short way. And so maybe the Mishnah actually abbreviates the part about abbreviations. Okay, but in order to fill out the full Mishnah as it originally was, we have to add a few words from the version that we have, and therefore the full Mishnah would read as follows: any substitutes of a Nazir is the same as a Nazir. And also, a second category, any abbreviations of a Nazir also means a Nazir. And so we have A and B, and then after we mention B, ve'elu hen yadot, and I'm going to give you some examples of abbreviations. Just saying, I will be, that's an abbreviation, and that's sufficient. Okay, good. So now that we added those words in, now we ask about the order. Since in the categories, let's call them A and B, first you mention the substitutes, that's A. And then you mention abbreviations, that's B. So you should go in the same order when you actually give details of them. Right? You give the general category A, B, then you should follow the details of A, meaning substitutes, and then B, abbreviations. But instead it does an A, B, B, A structure, right? A chiastic structure. So why not do A, B, A, B? And the answer is Tana me'ahu desalikahu mefaresh beresha. No, the Tana likes to mention and give the details of what it just mentioned previously. It's a nice, pleasing structure to do A, B as the introduction. I'm going to talk about these two categories. And then, while I just said B, let me explain to you B first, and then go back to A. Right, and that's often done in many Mishnayot. And we're going to now bring 3 examples of where we have the Mishnah does in fact use that structure. Kiditnan. B'mei madikin u'b'mei en madikin u'mfaresh en madikin beresha. Second perek in Shabbat says, what do we use to light? What kind of wicks and oil do we use to light? And what is prohibited to use to light for Shabbat lamps? And so that's the general categories A and B. And as soon as it does en madikin, it explains, en madikin, these are the following items that you cannot use. So you see it uses an A, B, B, A structure, and this is typical. B'mei tomnin, b'mei en tomnin, mefaresh en tomnin beresha. Also from Masechet Shabbat, what kind of things are you allowed to use for insulation, to keep your food warm? And what can you not use for insulation because it's going to add more heat and cook the food? And then, after it lists the categories A and B, it details the B's first. So again, a chiastic structure. Another third example. Also from Masechet Shabbat, what things can a woman wear outside and is considered wearing and permitted, and what the kind of things is a woman not allowed to carry outside? And that would be considered carrying and not wearing, or we're afraid that she's going to take it off. Mefaresh lo tesei isha beresha. And then it explains the second category first, again an A, B, B, A structure. So we see that this is actually typical that we use this chiastic structure, and that's what we have in our Mishnah also. Remember, it's our reconstructed Mishnah. So you could ask, if once you're reconstructing the Mishnah, why not reconstruct it as A, B, A, B, and put Yadot first? Maybe they knew that it starts off, right? Everybody knows the name of the Perek, right? It's called, this is the Perek that's called Kol Kinuyeh. So it has to start off that way. But also, maybe actually they wanted it to be A, B, B, A, because that is so typical. All right, so far so good. Here's the problem. Here's a couple of examples of Mishnayot that don't follow the chiastic structure. Also from Shabbat. Vatanan, b'mei behema yosa u'b'mei ena yosa, mefaresh yoseh gamal beresha. In what ways what can an animal carry outside, and it's permitted? Even animals are considered carrying things if it's for the benefit of the animal themselves, right? Sometimes in New York you see dogs wearing a little jacket. Right, so that benefits the animal themselves. And what things can they not go out on? Because then that would be putting a burden on the animal, and you're not allowed to to use an animal and put a burden on it. So it follows, it gives those two categories, and then it goes back to A and says, oh, a gamal can go out with the following items. So you see, this is an A-B structure. And another one in Baba Batra, where it has four categories. Yesh nochalin u'manchilin, nochalin velo manchilin, manchilin velo nochalin, lo nochalin velo manchilin. It's going to give four categories of those who inherit or bequeath. And so there are some who both inherit to others and bequeath. And they can inherit from them, like a father and son. If a father dies, then the son inherits. And if a son dies without children, then the father inherits from the son. So that's nochalin u'manchilin. And then it goes into, and then the second category, some that do one or not the other. And the last category is that they do not inherit or inherit from each other. And then, so after it gives the four categories, A, B, C, D, it goes back to A. So this is an A, B, C, D structure, not a chiasm. So how can you explain, why does the Mishnah sometimes use chiasm and sometimes straightforward structure? You know what? The Mishnah uses both structures. Okay, so how does it decide which one to use? Oh, it has to do with the content. If you're talking about an isur, a prohibition upon an individual, then a person wants to know, oh, what am I not allowed to do? Oh, you're not allowed to use to carry these items out, woman. You're not allowed to use these wicks and oil for a candle. So if there's two categories, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. Tell me what I'm not allowed to do right away, so that I know. And then afterwards, you can fill in the things that I'm allowed to do. That's more important, more pressing. However, however, regarding an animal where it's only the prohibition is, of course, on the animal's owner, but it's only indirectly. It's not the person himself carrying, but the question is, what can an animal carry or not carry? And since the prohibition is more indirect to the owner of the animal, so the prohibition is less pressing. You could add, in this case, to explain it better, is that you might think that, it makes sense for people to wear clothing, right? People wear clothing, and so that makes sense. And so you'd assume, well, I guess a person can wear anything he's wearing. Oh, there's some exceptions that they can't wear? Or I need to know the exceptions, right? Because I would think that everything is allowed. So that's why you want to make sure to tell up front the things that are not allowed. Whereas for an animal, animals don't wear clothing. And so your presumption going in is that an animal can't wear, carry, have anything on the animal if it's going outside. And therefore, it's the bigger chidush for an animal is to say, oh, here's what an animal can wear, right? So that's the kind of the more interesting, the more pressing thing that we would want to know right away. So whatever is the chidush is going to be said first. Okay, good. Now, regarding nochalin, this doesn't fit into either of these. Like, it's not that it's a prohibition, but we're just talking about, who gets to inherit. And so here, we want to give the basic principle first. The basic principle of inheritance, you want to give the prototypical example of those who inherit to and inherit from, and that's a father and son. All the rest of them are exceptions where it doesn't work, where inheritance breaks down. Relationships that do not inherit to or from. And so it makes sense that you want to give the main example principle first. Okay, good. Now, based on that principle, let's go all the way back to our Mishnah in Nazir and say, you know what? You should explain the first thing first, the substitutes first. You said there are substitutes and there are abbreviations, so why not give the substitute first, right? Since that is the main principle. Substitute word is really basically like saying the word itself, right? If you call someone Bob instead of Robert, it's still their name. And so to say Nazik instead of Nazir, we don't even need a derivation for this. It's just so basic that just like you can say Nazir, you can say any other word that's basically a synonym that means also Nazir. So really that's the basic principle. Shouldn't you say that first? Ela hainu tam yadot ho'il ve'atyan lemidirasha chavivin le. And we answer actually quite it's exactly for that reason that we give the abbreviations first, precisely because abbreviations, we learn them from a dirasha. Because they are secondary, and we learn them from a dirasha, they are more beloved. All right, some things that are in the Torah itself, of course we love Torah, and that's the basis, that's the foundation. But with more beloved is the explanations, the derivations, the expansions that the rabbis make. Now let's see, where in fact do we learn this from? We learn the idea of abbreviations from the double language. Nazir lehazir. Since you use double language, Nazir and lehazir, we derive from that even abbreviations work. So because we want to emphasize the role of the rabbis in explaining and connecting the oral law to the written law, the Torah shebe'al peh to the Torah shebichtav, and that shows the rabbinic initiative. Hashem gives us the Torah, and then the rabbis take on the initiative of explaining and clarifying the matter, so that is more beloved. Okay, that's why it's in this case it's first. Now, v'tiftach behon beresha. Okay, if the abbreviations are really so beloved, then even in the general categories, why not start the very beginning of the Mishnah and by saying yadot Nazirut ken Nazirut, right? And so it'll still be A-B, where with abbreviations, substitutions as the categories, and then give the details of abbreviations and then substitutions. So you could have it all the way through if it's so beloved. Tana ki matchil beikad korban ulinan perushe mefaresh yadot beresha. No, our Tana, the compiler, the author of the Mishnah, wanted to start off with the basic law of the sacrifices of the Nazir. And so for the general category would say, listen, this is how you become a Nazir, including the substitutes or our basic formula. And so it gives A, B as the substitute, and then only then it brings the abbreviations. However, when it's explaining and giving the details of them, it wants to give the abbreviations first, precisely because those are a beloved category. Okay, next. Ha'omer ehe hareze nazir. The Mishnah mentioned this case of an abbreviation that someone says, I will be, that person is a Nazir. So we wonder, Dilma he beta'anit. This ka'amar, this abbreviation is so short, how do you have any idea what he means? If you say, I will be, maybe he means that I will be in fasting. Maybe he's taking upon himself a vow that he's going to fast. He doesn't say anything. So it's too ambiguous, isn't it? Amar Shemuel, Kegon Shaya Nazir Ober Lefanav. Shemuel explains that it depends on the context. And this is the Mishnah is talking about a case, for example, where there was a Nazir that was passing in front of him. He sees this Nazir with long hair, and he says, Ehe. And so it's clear from the context that he's looking at the Nazir and says, I'm going to be a Nazir. And that's what the Mishnah is talking about. That's why it works. Okay. Now we ask, now according to Shemuel, an abbreviation that is ambiguous, that is not clear, would that not be a valid abbreviation? In other words, if it was not that a Nazir was walking by, and it's a more ambiguous situation, then Shemuel, you're saying that it would not work, all right? Or do we want to really pin down Shemuel? Because this is a big topic, and so can we infer that that's what Shemuel would say? Only if it's extremely clear what he means, then it's a good abbreviation. Otherwise, it's not a valid abbreviation. And we answer, not necessarily. Amre bizman Nazir belefanav leka lesipuka. במילתא אחרינה. אבל ודאי אין הנזיר בלפניו אמרינא דילמה הבטנית כאמר. In fact, there are categories that are clear one way and totally unclear, and then something in the middle. So we don't know what Shemuel would say actually in the middle based on this. But the contrast would be if, as follows: if there's a person, a Nazir, walking in front of him, then there's no question, there's not even ambiguous. Certainly, everyone would agree that that person would be a Nazir. But if there's for sure no Nazir walking by him, right? There's no one around for miles. In that case, we have to assume that he means, I don't know, he could mean anything. See, he probably means he's fasting. And so that is not, it's considered not even ambiguous. If there's no Nazir around and he says, I will be, that's not a case of ambiguity. There's no Nazir around. There's no reason to think he's talking about a Nazir. So therefore, we can't assume that in between case, some case between those two, where there's some Nazir, but maybe it's far away, where that would be ambiguous, we can't assume that Shemuel would for sure say that that's no good, that has to be right in front of him. Okay. Now, v'dirma lepotro min kol benotav ka'amar. We says, hold on, it's still ambiguous. Even if a Nazir is right in front of you, and he says, eheh, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm saying I want to be a Nazir. Maybe I'm taking upon myself the obligation for his korbanot. This was a thing that was done in olden days, at times of Bet HaMikdash. People would sponsor a Nazir. The Nazir has to go through the whole ordeal for, let's say, 30 days and prevent himself from all those prohibitions, but it takes it's a lot of expense to bring all of the sacrifices that a Nazir has to bring. So sometimes people that could afford it, they would sponsor the korbanot of a Nazir, and thereby they would kind of get the credit for the Nazir. They get the mitzvah because they are giving the korban. We'll see more about that. Okay, so here maybe when he says eheh, I see a Nazir and I say eheh, maybe it means that I want to exempt this Nazir from his korbanot because I'm going to bring them. Right? So it's still pretty ambiguous what he means. So we answer no. They come on belibo. It's got to be a case where he says he has a verbal part and a mental part. Verbally he says eheh, but in his mind you ask him, what did you mean when you said eheh? What were you thinking? Oh, I was thinking I'm going to be a Nazir. Right? So you need both those parts. If someone just thinks something, so just thinking's an idea is not going to make himself obligated. But if he says something out loud, and then he can explain what he was thinking, so those two things together make it sufficiently unambiguous, and that's why he would become a Nazir. We ask, hold on, if that's what we're talking about, a case where Nazir is in front of him, he says eheh, and he has in mind that means I want to actually be a Nazir, then what's the chidush? Why would the Mishnah even need to say such a case? Isn't that obvious? We say not necessarily. I might have thought that you have to have your mouth and your mind identical, meaning I would have thought that you actually have to articulate both things. I have to say I want to be eheh and I want to eheh a Nazir, because otherwise it could be I just want to bring a korban. And so since I might have thought that wouldn't work, that's what Shemuel is coming to explain, is the chidush of the Mishnah, that even if he just has a person walking in front of him, and all he says is eheh, but he has in mind, right, then that's sufficient. You can have in mind what the meaning of your word is, and you don't actually have to articulate the meaning of what you have in mind. In other words, even though it actually is ambiguous, even though a Nazir walking in front of you and saying "heh" also has an ambiguity, because it could mean I want to be a Nazir or I want to sponsor his korbanot. As long as you have in mind one or the other, that is sufficient, and that is the chidush of the Mishnah in the interpretation of Shemuel. Okay, we'll go a little bit more. Eheh na'eh Nazir. The next example of the Mishnah was a person says, I will be beautiful. That is also a way of saying, I'm going to be a Nazir with nice long curly hair. Okay, hold on, that's also ambiguous. If it says, I want to be beautiful, maybe it means I am going to be beautiful before God in mitzvot. I'm going to do mitzvot in a beautiful way. Kedatanya, and we have a Baraita that teaches precisely this law, this lesson. Ze Eli ve'anvehu. When we say, this is my God and I will glorify him, how can we glorify God, right? What can we do? You're going to bring him gold, silver, nice scarf, right? What can we possibly do as human beings to glorify our Creator? And the answer is, Ena'eh lefanav b'misvot, E'eseh lefanav sukkah na'ah, lulav na'eh, sisit na'ah, Echtob lefanav sefer Torah na'eh, Ve'echrechenu b'shirayim na'im. We can beautify Hashem through our performance of misvot. We can make a beautiful sukkah. You can make a plain old sukkah just out of, plain old boards. But you want to make a beautiful sukkah, you add decorations to it to show how much we love the misvot. or a lulav, a nice, beautiful lulav, not just the basic minimum $3 lulav, but you spend a little extra for something that's more beautiful. You make tzitzit in a beautiful way, on a nice garment. You tie them nicely. I'm going to write a Sefer Torah, and you write it with beautiful handwriting, and you take the Torah and you put it in beautiful silk cloths, or write a nice case for the Sefer Torah, and all these are ways that we can bring beauty to the mitzvot and glorify HaKadosh Baruch Hu thereby. So when a person says, Ehe na'eh, I want to bring beauty, maybe he's talking about through the mitzvot. How do you know he's talking about a Nazir? Amar Shemuel shetafus bisaro v'amar en na'eh. Oh, Shemuel says, you're right. If he just said Ehe na'eh by itself, that would be too ambiguous. Rather, the Mishnah is talking about a case where he's holding on to his hair, and he said, I'm going to be beautiful, and it's clear that by holding his hair, he indicates that this is going to be beautiful through his hair by being a Nazir. Okay, good. So again, Shemuel comes to the rescue to explain the Mishnah. Now, Nazira milta da'avera, v'abrinan le na'eh. Hold on. How can you call being a Nazir something beautiful? I understand the guy has curls, but becoming a Nazir is a matter of transgression. Right? We're going to see this theme come up more. But the basic idea is that a person is making prohibited what the Torah permitted to him, so you're adding more prohibitions. So who said you should do that? Just like in vows, we said, who makes vows? It is Sha'im. If a person says, I'm going to make vows like it is Sha'im, that's a good formula, because only evil people make vows. Someone who has some problem, maybe with being too materialistic. Okay, so he goes and becomes a Nazir. Right? But this is associated with Avera. So how could you say, I'm going to be beautiful through a Nazir, which is connected with transgression? And so we answer, in dafilu Rabbi Elazar HaKapar Damar Nazir Hoteh, Hanemi Legebe Nazir Tameh. Yes, it is in fact beautiful, and everyone would agree. First of all, there are some people that are going to show that being a Nazir is a high level, and is a very nice thing to do, right? It's going above and beyond. But even according to the Rabbi Elazar HaKapar, who says a Nazir is a sinner, and it's not good to be a Nazir, he only said that regarding a Nazir who becomes Tameh. Let's say he's supposed to be a Nazir for 30 days, and 15 days later, in the middle of his tenure, he becomes Tameh for a touch. He goes in a cemetery. And now he has to void all the 15 days he had before. They don't count. And he has to start all over again. As the Pasuk says, the first days, they fall away. They're void because he became defiled. And now he has to start all over again. And so now, this guy, he took upon himself that he's going to be Nazir for 30 days. That's what he had in mind. But now we're making him, he tried to be Nazir for 15 days. And now he's going to have to start all over again. He's going to lose his drive. And it's more likely that he's going to sin. So hatamhu dilma atel me'bad al nazirute. That's why the Rabbi Elazar HaKapar called a Nazir a sinner. But he was only referring to a Nazir who became Tameh. And now it's going to be very difficult for him to continue, because he didn't want to even be a Nazir for that long. And so he's going to lose his motivation, and there's a good possibility that he will sin. That's what Rabbi Elazar HaKapar was against. Avan Nazir tahor lav chote karibe. But if he's a Nazir and he's tahor and he's doing everything right, so that's not called a chote. Even Rabbi Elazar HaKapar, who said Nazir is choteh, was only referring to that category, but a general Nazir is a beautiful thing, and therefore, yes, it is fitting to say, if a person says, Hareni na'eh, that na'eh means I'm going to be beautiful, and that could be through mitzvot, but if he's holding his hair, that means I'm going to be beautiful through the mitzvah of Nezirut. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.